Hello everybody, Ellie here for WhoCulture, and welcome back to another episode of Retro Ups and Downs, where we take an old episode of Doctor Who as opposed to the current episodes and review them just as we would the current episodes. And we thought there is no greater choice of episode, given that we are celebrating 20 years of modern Doctor Who this year, than the one that started it all, Rose. I always thought I watched Rose the day that it aired. I have since learned from my lovely mother that I did not in fact watch Rose on its air date in 2005 because I was too young and too scared. My mum certainly did watch it. She was a fan of Doctor Who and she was very excited to watch the revival when it first came out in 2005. I definitely did watch it at a young age, but clearly not when I thought I did. But anyway, I digress. Let's get into the ups and downs for Rose.
I'm the Doctor, by the way. What's your name?
Rose.
Nice to meet you, Rose. Run for your life.
Let's kick things off straight away with an up for the revamped opening theme tune. This theme tune, in my opinion, is the best the Doctor Who theme tune has ever sounded. Now, it has gone through, between 2005 and 2010, it did go through some slight changes, not massive changes, not compared to them when it changed for the Matt Smith era or anything like that. Some slight changes, but Murray Gold coming in strong, straight off the bat. Let's revamp the theme tune, and it's amazing. So, not really a surprise that Murray Gold gets the first up for the revival. Something else that's quite interesting about this episode, because I think the modern era of Doctor Who, New Who, is kind of famous for the cold opens that we have for the episodes. They're quite iconic for New Who. And yet this episode doesn't have a cold open. It kicks off straight away with the theme tune, which is very strange considering how iconic the cold opens later become. But not here, not Rose. It started with the theme tune. And then we have something I love about modern Doctor Who. I love it when this happens. When the episode opens with a shot in space looking at Earth, and then it kind of zooms into Earth where the action is. I love it when they do that. That happens quite a few times in New Who. But it happened first, right here in Rose, setting the precedent for it to happen. And then we are introduced to Rose. Straight away, we're introduced to Rose as she's going through the motions of her life and going to work at Henrik's, which is a reverse Easter egg, if you will, because we later see posters for Henrik's in the Giggle, and the location, the exterior location for that shop was also seen in the church on Ruby Road. So not really an Easter egg because it happened first in Rose, but a reverse Easter egg of sorts. Another up straight away for this episode is the intensity, the tension as soon as Rose goes down into the basement. This immediately says this revival of Doctor Who is not going to shy away from being scary and being intense. So don't worry, and also maybe a little bit of this is a step up from what came before. In fact, I think compared to newer seasons, this kind of grounded, tense situation is more scary because it's more relatable. You've removed the big budgets that we're seeing now, and you're in this kind of really plausible scenario that an audience can relate to. It's not implausible to go down into a basement and be a little bit scared of the flickering lights and the random sounds that you can hear and walking amongst shop mannequins. It's pretty plausible that you'd be quite scared. And then added to this scene, you've got the music and the sound effects, which just add another layer to the intensity and the creepiness of what's going on here. And I think this scene just works so well. And as I say, you've removed the big budgetness that you might have in this scene now. And so it's so much more grounded and relatable to the audience. You're relying on the audience's own fears of a scenario like this, and then adding some sound effects to kind of extend that fear. But you're actually relying mostly on the audience's own interpretation and fears of a scenario like this. And I think that is when Doctor Who is at its best, when it's kind of grounded in reality. And while we're on the topic of that relatability and the grounded realities, let's have an up right at the beginning for Rose, the character of Rose, because she is such a relatable character. Within the opening 10 minutes of this episode, we get who Rose is. And in our lives, we've either been a Rose at some point or we've known a Rose in our life. Whether it's her unfulfilling job, whether it's the relationship she has with Jackie, with her mother. Actually, side note, another up there for Jackie because she's just brilliant. She has some great one-liners. She may do a little bit of overacting every now and then, but I think that just adds to the character. Jackie gets an up from me. Or even if it's the relationship that Rose has with Mickey, this kind of strange relationship that's a little one-sided perhaps, or just a little bit boring. And then there's the way she responds to the absurdity of the Doctor and the situation that revolves around the Doctor. It's kind of more irritation, curiosity, rather than just awe and wonder immediately. That it's far more grounded and realistic in how most people would probably react to this situation, as opposed to immediately just going, wow, this is incredible, I want to do adventure with you forever. More like, hang on a minute, what's going on here? You're crazy. What? But at the same time, you can really tell with Rose that she's clearly desires more. She's bored with life and she craves something more in her life. And then along comes the Doctor and the Autons, which is another up. The fact that Russell T Davies made the decision to reboot Doctor Who and in the first episode use a familiar classic monster. First of all, it served to kind of reassure viewers of classic Who that this was just a modernised continuation of what came before, as opposed to a complete new reboot that was going to ignore all of the classic era of the show. But also, the Autons, especially in that shop mannequin form, are some classic monsters that do still hold up today to a modern audience. You know, shop mannequins are terrifying. They're terrifying without the whole chasing you and killing you part. So for me, I think Doctor Who works best when the monsters and the situations are rooted in real life fears. When they take something from every day and twist it into something terrifying and scary. And, you know, it's all very well having things like the Silurians or the Sontarans, which we did have in classic Who, but they're very clearly not of this world. And when the monsters are more scary is when it's something that you see in your everyday life and suddenly it becomes something terrifying. And the shop mannequins certainly are terrifying when they're moving and just, they're very creepy. I will say though, for as scary and foreboding as the mannequins are when they're moving slowly, kind of lose the fear factor somewhat when they start to chase Rose and the Doctor down the corridor. Once they're moving fast and they're running, they kind of look a bit more funny than scary. And if you didn't get that, go back and watch that scene, because when they're running down the corridor, they just look hilarious. And speaking of the Doctor, of course, take an up Christopher Eccleston as the Ninth Doctor. He's so different to all the Doctors that came before. You know, he's sarcastic, he's hot-headed, there's a deep intensity. And I think Christopher Eccleston plays this kind of troubled version of the Doctor really, really well. You know, on the surface, it's all sarcasm and making light of a very serious situation. But then you have other moments, like when he's talking about feeling the earth moving, that really highlight that this Doctor has a lot more baggage than most of the previous incarnations. He's a really interesting incarnation, and I think Christopher Eccleston just gets it. He gets that there's layers to this character, and we start to see those layers in the way that he'll make light of a situation, but you can also see something just behind the eyes there, that there's more to him, and he kind of relies on the sarcasm and the jokes, maybe as his own coping mechanism, but also there's clearly anger in him. And we, at this point, don't know what's caused that anger. And it's just a really interesting and new version of the Doctor compared to anything we'd seen before. So I think for viewers watching this new revival who were familiar with classic Who, there must have been a lot of intrigue as to what's happened to this Doctor. And it certainly was enough to pique the interest of Rose, because Rose goes to seek out good old Clive. We gotta love Clive. You know, he's basically doing the work that Linda did before Linda was ever mentioned in Doctor Who. Maybe he was a member of Linda. He was never mentioned, but, you know, they may have done a lot better if he was there. Anyway, can we also just take a moment to acknowledge this amazing amazing Photoshop work of putting Christopher Eccleston's face into a photo of the JFK assassination, because top-notch work right there. Now, while Rose is talking to Clive, you've got Mickey waiting outside in the car just in case Clive turns out to be a nutter. Safety first. I appreciate that. Side note as well, why are there so many houses for sale on Clive Street? Like, what is going on this street that so many people keep wanting to move? What is happening here? But I'm afraid the time has come. Definitely a down here. The wheelie bin situation. Okay, like, here's the thing. I can forgive hokiness. In fact, I love hokiness in Doctor Who. But there is a line, and I fear the wheelie bin scene crosses that line. I can literally see, you can't actually see, but in my mind you can just see the crew member that's just out of frame pulling that bin along the floor. It's just, I can't imagine it was even good at the time. I mean, it certainly doesn't look good now, but even in 2005 I feel like we're stretching it a little bit, really. Then of course we have the whole Mickey's hands sticking to the bin, which I will say of the whole sequence is probably the better part. And then he gets swallowed by the bin, and where you completely lose me is when the bin then does this comical burp. I'm sorry, it's silly. Even reviews at the time commented on how silly the burping bin was. No, sorry, you've lost me. And I'm afraid what follows is another down, which is the whole plastic Mickey situation. Now, here's the thing, I can almost forgive the appearance. Like, I get that as an audience, we're supposed to be able to tell that this is a replacement and clearly not Mickey. So I guess it needs to be slightly obvious that this is not Mickey. So I can almost forgive the appearance. What I cannot forgive, though, is how the hell Rose took so long to figure out that something was wrong. Right, first of all, Mickey suddenly cannot drive in a straight line. And I'm pretty sure that when he drove her to Clive's house, he could drive perfectly fine. Secondly, he's suddenly just chanting the word pizza in the car like that's totally normal. And she, again, hasn't noticed that something's wrong. I mean, the driving alone would have me going, stop the car, I'm getting out. Then he literally is glitching at the dinner table, and she still takes way too long to notice. In fact, she only really notices when the Doctor pops a cork into his head, which I'm afraid is another down. Now, the thing is, it's difficult to review an episode that came out 20 years ago without acknowledging the advancements that have happened since then in terms of CGI and visual effects. You know, it would be unfair of me to down every CGI moment in these episodes, looking at it with the mindset of a 2025 viewer. So with that in mind, I can let things slide. You know, like later on, the Nestine consciousness. Does it look great? No. But it's not a down because I can acknowledge that this was 20 years ago CGI, and at the time it looked really impressive, and the reviews of the time even acknowledged the impressiveness of the effects. But again, as I said earlier, there is a line, and you cannot convince me that anyone watched that cork go into Plastic Mickey's head and not roll their eyes, because it just looks ridiculous. It looks like a Snapchat filter. Not good. Not good. And then the Doctor literally pulls his head off, his hands turn into paddles, and he just starts smashing up the joint while everyone else runs away screaming. To be honest though, I think he actually looks the most scary without his head and with the paddle hands. When he's smashing things up, that's actually more scary. I think it was the head that was off-putting. Anyway, everyone's running around, including the Doctor and Rose. They've skedaddled out of there, and it looks like it's a dead end. And then we have another up. We have the first TARDIS reaction of the revival of Doctor Who, and it is perfect. It's not overplayed, it's not hammy, it's a totally natural reaction. I do think that Billie Piper definitely had an advantage here because she was the first of the modern era. She was the first to give a TARDIS reaction. And I do feel like the companion actors since, especially the newer ones, I feel really have a struggle with how to perform this scene without it being too cliched. And I do fear that it has become a bit of a cliche, this TARDIS response moment. And every actor wants to make it their own, but there's only so much you can really do with this kind of confusion and awe and wonder at walking into a box that's bigger on the inside. So I don't envy the kind of newer actors, newer companion actors who have to try and make this scene their own, not make it hammy, not overplay it, not fall into the cliche of it. But obviously Billie Piper was the first to do it, and I think she did it really, really well. It's a word I keep using for Rose, but it's grounded. It's a grounded response. There's more confusion at what the hell she's just walked into rather than wonder and awe about it. She's not impressed, she's just confused. And in this moment, once we've got over the TARDIS being bigger on the inside, we have another up, and that is the dynamic between Rose and Nine. We've spoken a lot about the necessity and the need for conflict between the Doctor and the companions recently, following season 1, and there being a lack of that between 15 and Ruby. This here in this scene is an exact example of what we mean when we say we need conflict between the Doctor and the companion. You know, Rose pointing out how inconsiderate the Doctor is being, not even thinking about Mickey and the consequences of what might have just happened. And I think the thing is with the Doctor and Rose is they're both very checked out of life in very different ways, but they're both checked out of life in this moment. And what we see happen is they bring something out in each other. Rose kind of brings the Doctor back to humanity in a way and kind of brings out that compassion to him that he seems to have lost. And in return, the Doctor shows Rose her own value and shows her the wonders of the universe. So they complement each other really, really well. But where it all starts is based in conflict, and two people with opposing views and opposing lives and opposing mindsets bringing something out in each other, which this is such a great example of. Right from the very moment. And the thing is you expect, or the Doctor expects, wonder. Rose has walked into the TARDIS. He's expecting that grandiose reaction, how amazing and wonderful you are. And she's far more grounded, and so she's kind of reminding him, what about Mickey? Is he dead? I'm going to have to tell his mother that he's dead, and you've just letting his head melt there. So I think this is a great example of what a great Doctor-companion relationship should be. And then we come to another up in this episode. This moment between the Doctor and the nesting consciousness is basically the introduction of the great mystery of New Who, which is the Time War. Now, we don't get a lot in this moment, but we start to get trickles of information that clearly highlight that something has happened. At the time, the burst of emotion and terror that the Doctor expresses in this moment was something entirely new. It's not really something we'd seen from the Doctor before. And as I mentioned earlier, this variation of the Doctor has clearly experienced something. And this moment really highlights the fact that he's experienced something awful since the last time we saw him. Since we saw him as Paul McGann, and now something has happened in this gap. Now, obviously, later we would learn from the Day of the Doctor what that would be. We'd get the full details of that. But for a long time, the Time War was teased and we got more information about it. But it took a long time for all of it to unfold and for us to really understand the intensity and the level of which this had affected the Doctor and what had actually happened. And this moment here served really well as a moment of exposition, but also not. Because it clearly teased something that we were going to be learning, but also didn't really tell us much. And it just gets those hooks into you to make you want to continue watching to find out what had happened since we last saw the Doctor. But the consciousness did get scared, so it did unleash the mannequins to start killing everybody. And I must say, this whole sequence in the shopping centre with the mannequins coming alive and chasing people and killing people, there's so much nostalgia in this scene for me. First of all, you've got Jackie with her Jane Norman bag, which I guarantee you every single girl in like the 2000 and, well, basically every single girl between 2005 and I'd say 2015 had as their PE bag at some point at school. I will include myself in that. I definitely had a Jane Norman bag that I used at school at some point. Not necessarily in this episode, but you've also got Rose wearing lots of punky fish clothes. Again, another shop I used to spend a lot of time in. I don't think it exists anymore. Actually, I think it does, but only online. Which again is another point because you've got this whole shopping centre with all the shops open. None of them have been closed down. None of them have been moved to online only. And that is a rarity these days. If you go into your local shopping centre now, guarantee you there's so many shops that are all closed down and empty. Shopping centres are a thing of the past these days. So watching this scene is so nostalgic of my childhood. The things they're wearing, the bags they're holding, the shops they're walking past. and the fact that this destruction is happening and not a single person pulls out a smartphone to start videoing it. They're all just legging it. They're running for their lives. No one's thinking, I'm just going to stop and start videoing this. So much nostalgia. I love it. I think this might be one of my favourite scenes in the whole episode just because of the nostalgic element of it. The Doctor is detained by mannequins, and someone's got to do something. Someone's got to save the day, and this is where we come to another up, where Rose starts to realise her potential and starts to see her value. You know, as she literally notes in this scene, she's got no A-levels, she's got no job, she's got no future, but what she does have is the under-7s bronze in gymnastics, and she swoops in, she saves the day, she kicks those mannequins down into that consciousness, she saves the Doctor. I mean, the Doctor is literally powerless at this point. Without Rose, the world would have ended in the first episode. And what I really love about this is this message that you should look for what you have got in life. So you might not have this, this, and this, but there is something that's positive in your life, and let's focus on that and go with that. And that's exactly what she does. She says, you know, I might not have all these wonderful things, but I have got this one skill and I can use it in this moment and it can be valuable. And she starts to realise her own worth in this moment. And it's immediately seeing this growth in the character and the influence that the Doctor has on Rose, and then vice versa, the influence that Rose then has on the Doctor. So I think it's just a great moment in the episode. It's comical as well, you know, the way that Rose delivers it. And I think it's just a really great way of kind of showing the growth that this character is going to go on. So overall, I think this was a really great episode to be the introduction of what New Who was going to be. It made clear strides in taking the show in a kind of more serious lane. You know, when you look at the sets and effects for the time, they were far more realistic and sturdy compared to the things we'd seen in the classic era. I mean, compared to now, maybe some of them look a little hokey, but for the time, it was a massive step up. Then you've also got the introduction of this kind of troubled, hot-headed Doctor, which told audiences that there was going to be maybe more drama and some more seriousness amongst the hokiness in this new revival of the show, which I think was such an advantage to New Who. It took the show onto a new level, and I think this episode did a really good job of telling audiences from the get-go, this is going to be a step up. Then, of course, we have the introduction of this new companion who's not afraid to call the Doctor out when he's in the wrong and to stand her ground, which is a far cry from where the show started. And again, just kind of highlights the progression that this show was striving towards and this revival was hoping to make waves in. Now, it clearly also had a bigger budget than classic Who ever did. But in my opinion, it's not been spoiled by too much of a budget, like I feel like potentially newer stuff has been. And so the result is that the show focused on characters, character development, and grounded storytelling, because that's what its budget was. It wasn't about how amazing can we make the effects, which, as I've said, were a step up compared to classic Who. But they really focused, their currency was the characters and the world building and the grounded stories that they were telling, because that's what they had to rely on to keep people engrossed in and intrigued and keep people hooked to the story. And personally, I think that is better than just throwing a big budget and going, look at these lovely glamorous effects we can produce. That's not what it's about for me. So I think when you look at an episode like Rose, that's where you can really see how Doctor Who can be at its best. And there you have it. There are my ups and downs for Rose. I would like you in the comments down below to give me some of your memories and thoughts on the episode of Rose as we are entering the 20th anniversary of Modern Who. So I really want to know your stories surrounding this episode. I'm very intrigued to hear about them. Thank you so much for joining me for these retro ups and downs. Maybe there'll be more to come, who knows, stay tuned. But of course, in the meantime, we will have, in the following 2 months, the ups and downs coming weekly for all the new episodes of season 2. So make sure you have that subscribe button hit so you don't miss all the content that comes for season 2. In the meantime, I've been Ellie for WhoCulture, and in the words of River Song herself, goodbye, sweeties.